Hi, and welcome to CMO Journeys. I'm Christian Padak, and on this show, I talk with the marketing leaders behind some of today's most interesting brands. We get into their career paths, how they think about marketing, and how they work with agencies. Everspring is a technology-first partner helping universities drive enrollment and growth by connecting marketing, data, and platform infrastructure. At a time when AI is fundamentally changing how students discover and choose programs. Today, I'm joined by Mike Bell, Everspring's Chief Marketing Officer, who leads full funnel marketing across over 45 higher ed partners and brings a unique systems-driven perspective shaped by a career that started in the Air Force and evolved across consulting, consumer brands, and SaaS. Mike, welcome to CMO Journeys.
Thanks, Christian. Thanks for having me.
So this is CMO Journeys, obviously, so I'd like to start with your journey. And I'd love to know, if you think back to high school, would someone or anyone have predicted that you end up as a CMO?
Probably literally no one, myself included. Yeah, it was not the path I thought I would take. And it was probably, like a lot of people you interview, a twisty, windy journey that no one could have predicted, but I wouldn't have had it any other way. Probably from as early as I could walk and talk, I was obsessed with one thing. It wasn't marketing, it was planes. And I was obsessed with flying planes and followed that path and ended up in the Air Force, which ended up in a very long, weird, twisted way of turning me into a marketer. So yeah, not what I would have expected.
Yeah, so yeah, you said it. You started your career in the Air Force working on the F-22 program, from what I understand. How did that experience shape the way you think about leadership and decision making?
It's a great question because it's not something that's intuitive. It's not something I would have planned, but it was an incredibly fortunate experience and a very applicable. One of the things that I was lucky enough to be part of, and anyone who's been in the military, I think in any country, in any branch would relate to, is they take the time to invest in their leaders like a lot of organizations don't. They afford to do it. They invest in it. They're not looking for an ROI at every turn. And so there's what I would almost argue somewhat of inefficient spending in developing their leaders. And so I was very, very lucky to benefit from that. Things like officer training, squadron officer school, the things they do as a lieutenant and as a captain to kind of make you take a step back. It's funny, I was just telling someone on my team the other day, I remember when I was 20-something, them having this mantra of the only wrong decision is indecision. And at the time being like, I don't know what that means at all. And I think about that every single day in my career now. And I'm so glad that those are the things they instilled in me. The other thing is they kind of, you're taught in a structure like that to think of things strategically. And that is something that is obviously very incredibly applicable to marketing. And the other thing that I think that they do is they kind of make you a utility player. They try to drop you into any situation. As soon as you get comfortable, they go ahead and make you very uncomfortable. It was not always pleasant in your 20s, but what's great about that is now that I'm in my 50s, I find myself never worrying about the details too much and taking a step back, looking at the big picture, always being a forest for the trees kind of guy, and trying to think of what's a logical way to organize this and get my team focused on getting the results we need to get.
Yeah, that's really interesting how that has created some habits or instincts that you're now seeing just kind of come about in how you lead your teams today. So as you said, you come from a really highly structured, mission critical type environment now into marketing. What was maybe the biggest adjustment in how decisions get made?
That's a great question. So like you'd mentioned, my path went from being an officer in the military to being a consultant, which was an intentional progression because, I was finding myself at the age of 30, like most kids out of college were, like, I don't know what I do when I grew up. And so I intentionally went into wearing a lot of hats role, which was consulting, and then from there into CPG, and then from there into startups. But I'd say the immediate sort of culture shift for me was communication. And what I mean by that is, there's a lot of acronyms that are the exact same acronyms with not at all the same meaning. So, for example, CRM, we all know really well in marketing. CRM in the Air Force is crew resource management, coordinating with the other people in the cockpit. So it's not at all the same thing. And the other thing is there's an implied hierarchy in the military that is advantageous in that environment, but you end up not developing the muscles as a leader that you need to in a corporation, right? So walking in, sort of like I'm lucky I went the progression I did because every chapter ended up being additive, sort of helping develop me and make me a more well-rounded individual. But taking a step back and sort of, instead of sort of decreeing what we were going to do and saying, hey guys, let's sit down in a flatter organization type structure, talk about the problem, come at it from a diversity of perspectives, and understanding that I was underutilizing, quite frankly, some of my team in my initial years in the corporate America. And that was a thing that I guess those muscles just weren't developed for me. And taking the step back and having coworkers to point that out to me, I really appreciated, and it made me into a better leader than I would have been otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, I'd have to imagine Air Force, obviously decisions, have, real consequences. I'm curious, how has that influenced your risk tolerance now as a marketing leader?
It's a good question. I don't know that I've thought about it before, but I think, to your point, it does make things like whether we're going to launch this bar of soap or not seem comparatively not so critical. And I think that's a good thing, in that you don't stress about the little things. But I'd say, I don't know. I think that'd probably be the biggest thing, is that you kind of you put things in perspective, right? It's not that critical of a thing, but also it helps you sort of orient around, what are we here to do? Like, everything in the military is objective or end outcome oriented, right? And so I think I see this in some organizations. I still see it sometimes in our current organization, where people kind of get attached to the process or attached to the methodology, and they lose sight of the intent or the spirit behind the methodology, right? So if we've done this thing and we've always done it this way, originally at its inception, it was to get the following out. Over time, if you start to see that it's having less effect in that direction, especially the world we're in now, everything is changing around us. It's really beneficial to take a step back and say, is this still the best way to do it? And I would say one of the things that's actually been a misconception with a lot of people who are ex-military is that you're very much a rule follower. I would argue, especially as an officer, you're very much not. You're given what's called the commander's intent. You're where you're at. You need to get to where you need to be. You have a set objective from your commander, but they are not micromanaging at all about how you get there. And that's not only freeing, but it's sometimes scary, right? Like, so if you're a young lieutenant and you have this thing to do and no one's told you how to do it, it is really scary and intimidating. But what's great about it is it instills in you a priority to always look at it to get to that objective the fastest and the best and most efficient way. And I think that's maybe a perspective that background brings for me that a lot of my colleagues don't maybe have inherently.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's such an interesting career path that you've gone on. A lot of pivots. Obviously, we talked about the Air Force, and then consulting, to brand, to fintech, now to higher ed. Was there a moment where you felt just out of your depth and just had to figure it out?
Lots of moments. Like, every one of those pivots, I would argue, right? So I think when I first left the military, it's kind of a home, right? I was a kid when I left home and did that, and then I find myself at the age of 30 in this weird, kind of scary, cold corporate world. There is a definite, like, did I do the right thing coming here? I feel like very much like a fish out of water. But I would say, and that's when I had those sort of learnings that I shared with you in terms of how to communicate differently. And with every one of those pivots and every one of those self-assessments came some growth. Same thing when I went from consulting into CPG, took a step back. I had to reboot. I had to learn how to be a marketer. It was something, but the other thing I will say is, in the background of every one of those things, when I went from being military to being in corporate, it was an intentional thing. It was scary, but I knew there'd be some opportunity on the other side of it. Same thing going from consulting into CPG and being a marketer outright. Didn't regret that. Going from being a CPG marketer to a digital marketer, every one of those things, looking at what's our cost per click, impressions were no longer the major KPI. Looking at things like retargeting and how to optimize for user experience. These are all sort of learnings. Then going into education, incredibly humbling market. That pipeline does not move like e-commerce, and there's a lot less signals in it for you to grab onto. Go, aha, this is what's going on. And now the latest chapter being AI, it's just another pivot.
Yeah. So I'm sure you've had over this career a lot of different mentors or leaders that influenced you, and I'm curious if there's anyone that sticks out that helps you kind of get through the decisions that you're trying to make today.
First thing I would say is it's hard to narrow it down to one, because I've been really lucky. I've had a mentor in every one of those chapters. I guess if I had to pick It would be the first CMO I worked for. And I think the reason for his name is Marvin Davis. He was my CMO at LifeLock. Really smart marketer. And again, one of those things where you would say things when I was a young 30 something and I was like, I don't know what that means. But now as a CMO, I reflect on it every day. Things like making sure you have the right players in the right positions, you used to say. Things like that in terms of anticipate and answer the question before it's asked. Things that sort of are fundamental to marketing, being a leader with marketing, which is probably the most applicable to what I do on a daily basis now.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people influence us over the careers, and I'm sure it's a tough question to ask. But yeah, I'm curious on the military side. Maybe is there somebody that still kind of rings true in the back of your head?
Absolutely, yeah. So my first commander, Colonel Alston was his name. He and I had a bit, even within the military, I had a bit of an unorthodox background. I actually started as an enlisted guy. I'm the first guy in my family to go to college. My parents came to the U.S. in the 70s. I worked doing a glamorous job of loading cargo planes and toilets, and had a couple of interactions with him. And he said, I think you've got potential. Have you ever thought about being an officer? And I said, not only do I want to be an officer, I'd love to fly. He took me under his wing, got me through a program where they paid for my undergrad, and then they actually ended up going on and paying for my MBA as well. But not only did he sort of demonstrate for what a real leader was, and I mean that in terms of being strong and all the sort of stereotypical, but really the bigger things that I didn't know, like being empathetic, going that extra mile for your troops, making sure everything was okay at home, making home visits, things like that. And interestingly enough, I worked for him as an guy, was commissioned, went off to flight school, and was in Germany 5 years later. And the base command, the major commander that was there turned out to be Colonel Alston himself, and bumped into him, had lunch with him, and it was great to follow up with him later on in my life when I myself was a leader at lower level of troops and got to see how I was doing against the guy I benchmarked myself against. It was great.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Great story. So let's shift gears a bit and talk a little bit more about today, your work at Everspring. So since stepping into the CMO role, how has your mandate evolved, especially as AI has really started to reshape how students discover and evaluate?
It's a good question, and I think it has evolved in simultaneously an unexpected way and a very predictable way. And what I mean by that is the form in which the disruption comes with AI is very different, and it takes you back to that theme we've been talking about here of taking a big step back and looking at the big picture is required. If you look at it at a tactical level, you'll miss the point and you'll get very confused and overwhelmed by it. But if you think about it in terms of the evolution of every medium that any marketer's ever done in the history of the practice, it's no different than, right? If you think about going from print to radio to TV to social media to influencers, that pivot is different, is not much different than AI, right? You're in a lot of ways that progression is losing control of the narrative, right? I think it started off very much of the bullhorn and decreeing down to your audience what the message is going to be, what the value proposition is going to be, and hoping you hit the mark, right? And it's become much more of a two-way conversation. You can almost argue with the introduction of AI and almost an agent in between us and our consumers, it's becoming somewhat of a three-way conversation, but that's not it's not an about face. It's not a different direction. And then behind the scenes on that, I think you're always trying to do more with less, always. That was true with the move from traditional, above the line media to digital media. This is no different than that. It's just going from digital to the next evolution of that. And if you think of the intent behind AI, it's the exact same intent as, say, paid or organic search, right? The algorithms that they're working on at Google are always about trying to get to the best answer that consumer is trying to ask. And this is no different. It's just coming in a new format.
Yeah. You've mentioned that decisions are increasingly being shaped before the buyers, in your case, the students are, ever engaged. At what point do you think decisions are actually being made now in your world?
I mean, it's happening before we see it, I would say. If I put it simply, I think that's what we're really seeing is if you look at within our industry, we're seeing about 25% disruption or cannibalization, if you want to call it that, of organic traffic into AI, you're getting less and less clicks. Google's seeing the same thing across industries. I talked to someone in a sort of adjacent industry to ours earlier this week, and they're saying they're seeing on order of 40 to 50% disruption of their organic traffic. That's staggering, right? And really what that is it's not translating into a click anymore, right? So I think as we've been doing marketing over this evolution I just outlined, there's been a positive trend in terms of a progression towards more and more control, right? So the old adage of marketing is I'm wasting half my budget, I just don't know which half. I'd say it got to a quarter or a tenth of it. Now we're getting back to an era of more around influence than control. And so what that is you're having that sort of decision point happening, not on your web pages, not in your lead form, not in your shopping cart, but in a conversation that is happening prior to them hitting your website. So it's the same funnel, if you want to think of it. The funnel's not dead, it's just moved up. That's all.
Yeah. So how does that change where marketing actually has influence now?
It's a good question. I think it's about context and clarity, right? That's what I think. Context beats volume, and it beats even authority. If you think about it from an SEO standpoint, it used to be about making sure you had the most volume, making sure you had the most domain authority. And what I would say SEO craved was authority, and the equivalent of that for AI is context. It's trying to look at every problem. It's trying to look at every topic from every single angle possible. So the more you can equip that agent to do that, the more likely you'll be a part of that conversation. And that's really what it is. And I'd say as it progresses and as it becomes more standard fare, and I was at an event a couple of weeks ago in San Francisco where they had the head of monetization for OpenAI, and they're now talking seriously about how do they run ads. And I don't know about you, but I've been getting ads served to me in the LLMs. As that comes online, it'll be more akin to what we've seen in other channels. But right now it's about making sure you're a part of the conversation. So again, back to sort of old metrics, it's about making sure there's an impression. If there's a conversation around your industry or your offering, that you're a part of that. That's the most important thing you could do as a marketer at this moment in time right now.
Yeah. So tell me a little about, so what is Everspring doing then to earn this visibility when these buyers may not even be visiting your website?
Great question. So what we've done, I mean, and the thing is, and you mentioned at the top of the call, we take a very data-driven approach, and I think most marketers nowadays do. But one of the things we have to do in higher ed that most industries may not have to do is we're looking at down funnel and sometimes offline data and bringing that back up. And I know when you look at the major platforms like Meta and Google, placing an increasing value on those types of that type of data as well. And with that, we've been able to see an interesting shift, not only within at the time we were looking at organic traffic, we were looking at search volume and the certain things that were happening, as well as increased signals of referral traffic coming from LLMs. And as we looked at that, we started to see what was going on. And it's not just that the conversation is shifting mechanically somewhere else in the funnel, but it's shifting the conversations that consumers, and in my case, students, are having. So what's new to us is that university, you probably had the same experience as I did. You're not setting up a consideration set. We never had consideration sets. And I've been doing this for 7+ years, this industry. It was very like, I'm going to go to this school. I want to get into this program. If I get into it, I'll take the modality that they decree, and I will spend what they think is worth, and I will, take as long as it takes to complete it. Now they're looking at it differently. They're setting up consideration sets, and I would say almost, maybe not a real term, but I would almost call it like a hyper consideration set. The consideration set was a part of it. You'd say brand was in the mix. All these things were in the mix, and consideration set was in the mix. But now it's the most important piece of the equation, where they're looking for outcomes. And I think that's industry agnostic. I want to get the following answer to my question or solution to my problem. And then they use AI to have that conversation and create 5 or 6 or 3 possible solutions to that problem. And then they down select from there. What that translates to for our industry is that brand doesn't carry the same weight, right? So branded keywords, and I think this is true across all search. If you look at Google, what Google's published on this, brand is not going away. It's not shrinking, but it's not driving the growth. Industry keywords are what is driving the growth. And I think AI is a big sort of fuel to the fire on that. And so the key to that is making sure you have a content strategy that is not only SEO friendly, but is AI friendly. And what I mean by AI friendly is making sure the schema is set up properly, making sure that it's being ingested and indexed properly by AI, and also making sure you're doing it in the form of a question. And back to the point of context earlier, you're giving it in a lot of different ways, right? You're showing it from every facet you can. Like when it's a question like, how much can I make with an online MBA, right? It's a comparison chart. It's a long form blog. It's a short form blog. It's comparing online to on campus. You're looking at it from every angle so that AI can ingest all of this information, have all the context it needs to put together a well-informed argument for or against something, and that ensures that you are. And also the other point that's worth mentioning quickly, you aren't just an answer in an AIO, for example, or in an LLM, but you're a citation as well. Citations is the new currency, I'd say, with AI.
Yeah, yeah. So with all that in mind, how are you allocating your marketing budget over the next, 12 to 24 months?
It's really interesting. I'd say, and I don't know if this is other marketers are seeing this or other industries are seeing this, but I'm seeing an increasing degradation in paid search. Like it is getting to the point where the juice isn't as much worth the squeeze as much as it used to be. And I don't mean like 5 years ago, I mean like 18 years ago. So we're also seeing increasingly when you are present in AI, call it answers, an increasing of the velocity across the board. So what I mean is if you are a part of the conversation in AI and you can measure that, and that's actually one thing I would say that we have a massive emphasis on making sure that you're optimized for AI. You have to be there. And when you are, you see it lights up all channels. You see organic work harder, you see paid media, paid search work harder. And most surprising to me is I'm seeing paid search disproportionately work harder. I'm seeing conversion rate within my portfolio that I wouldn't. We're already beating in a lot of our programs our projected conversion rates for paid social. And obviously, my CFO and my CEO set pretty aggressive targets. So when we're beating those, there's something going on there.
Yeah, yeah. What do you feel you're being? What feels harder now to move than maybe it did before?
What I don't know if this directly answers your question, but what I find hardest is the sort of period of, call it consumers going dark in the middle there, right? So you've got the same measurement at the top of the funnel, where you've got this sort of sense of whether you're an impression, you're a part of the conversation, that very top of the conversation where it's an AI. So when you're there, and because it's a conversation that is essentially offline, you're not in a series of trackable events like clicks. They kind of go dark while they're in their consideration set, and then they show up as a conversion or they don't. And so that's the thing that we're wrestling with to kind of get a better calibration so that we can be much more equipped to measure that middle of the funnel. Now, what we do know directionally right now is that if you're showing up here, you're going to convert better here. So that's at least beneficial. But I think as this medium, if you consider it that, which I don't even know if you could, it's so much bigger than that, evolves and becomes more the status quo, you'll start to see new signals come in on that. But for right now, we're just looking at top of the funnel and bottom of the funnel. I wish I had a better read on the middle of the funnel.
Yeah, that's interesting. So a lot of changes happening as you think about building out your internal marketing organization. How do you decide then, what capabilities you want to build internally, which ones you want to bring in outside partners or agencies? How do you think about that?
It's a great question. I think the content strategy piece, I'll call it, and the optimization from an organic, whether that be SEO or AI. And by the way, it's AIO, it's GEO, it's AI visibility. There's lots of terminologies swirling around, so I'll throw them all out there. I'm not sure who's landing on what. That's becoming something, I'll call it from a strategy standpoint, we're bringing more in-house. We just upped our organic team by 2 members. And the must in that was having some fluency on AI. We had some really sharp people we turned away because they weren't all the way there on that piece. Yeah. But I'd say in terms of partners, what I'm seeing is becoming increasingly important is the ability to measure all of the above, right? So there's starting to be a number of agencies and platforms out there who are turning their attention to AI and the idea of measuring and optimizing it. So someone who's fluent in that and sort of can help you pick signals, because it's across a number of different platforms. Like I would argue that Claude or ChatGPT or Perplexity on their own doesn't have a full picture of what the landscape of AI influence is. So finding a partner who can help you look at that holistically and how to place your bets better and where to place them is a critical sort of partnership we're increasingly looking for.
Yeah, yeah. As you think more kind of broadly with what's happening with AI, where do you think AI will replace agencies and maybe where it won't?
It's a good question. I think I'm not as animated about that, either excited or depressed about it as much, because I think what I'm seeing. So we've implemented a lot of automation. We've built about a dozen agents since the beginning of the year, and we've done it on very sort of rudimentary tasks like writing out briefs or writing blog content, writing ad copy. We have not figured out how to get it to make useful ad creative at all, and I'm sure that's everyone's experience. But it hasn't replaced the strategy component, right? So I think it's always going to be the most. It's going to have to be that will, at least, God, I hope in my lifetime, it will always be a human responsibility. And I think I see that bearing out, right? Every application I see of AI is, I would look at it like a very brilliant intern, right? Like it is a very sharp, very quick thinking, very well informed, kind of green member of the team, right? It is not at a point yet where it's going to be, oh, you should do A instead of B. And I don't mean like it doesn't suggest it; it suggests things all the time. But it is a much better co-pilot than it is aircraft commander. If I want to borrow an Air Force analogy, that makes sense. So I think agents that think that way and internal teams that think that way are always going to be relevant.
Yeah. As you know, we have a lot of agencies that follow this show here. What do you think? What would be some advice maybe back to agencies? Where do you see that they consistently maybe misunderstand how CMOs like yourself actually are making decisions today?
I mean, one of the things that I've been surprised at is I've seen agencies that are really in the thick of it, like really heavily organic traffic or SEO oriented agencies that are not really taking AI seriously.
Hmm.
And I don't know what's driving that. I think I'm constantly looking to my agency partners to be the ones who go, "Hey, did you see this report on that?" Or really interesting how this, and this is shifting what we're doing, right? So I think that's where I've seen misses and that's where I've seen opportunities. I think there's a whole gamut of agencies, and I think the ones that are much more on the tactical ends are the ones that should be worried about something like this. The ones who think more strategically, who are not as easy to come by, are going to become critical partners to their brands and not replaceable anytime soon. And I
Yeah.
think they're in a better advantage. They're in a more advantageous place because they are looking across number of brands, number of industries. So they're going to pick up trends and patterns much more than any individual uh, person like me at the helm of a brand or two or a dozen is going to see on their own.
Yeah. Where do you sit on the, agencies being specialists versus offering full service capabilities?
It's tough. It's tough because I think if you go too far in either direction, you lose it a little bit, right? So if you're too specialized, you're not seeing the forest for the trees. If you're if you're offering too much, I worry that there's not the depth of capabilities you need in there. I would say um, someone who thinks at a strategic level and can think about what the problem is to solve, who the target audience is, what kind of messaging will move them, and then goes to the tactics like whether this is a paid social or a organic or an AI visibility play. After that is probably the right mix in the middle there, sort of that Goldilocks scenario. And somebody could think of it that way. I think we're in a world where um, it's going to be increasingly important for all humans, but I'd say in particular agencies, to think about the strategy first and then the tactics second.
Yeah. Yeah. Exciting times. Scary and exciting all at the same time, right?
Yeah.
So obviously we've talked a lot about work. I'd like to shift gears a bit and kind of as we wind things down here. What's something that you enjoy that gives you a reset or helps you think more clearly when you're not so worried about AI? Let's say.
This is really a boring answer, but I love going to the gym in the morning with my wife. That's like just an hour where my brain is not being used at all. It's just physical, and you're not. And I mean, as I get older, it's less and less physical. But it is something where you just turn your brain off, just having an empty brain for an hour, no phone, no messages, no Slacks, and just kind of a reset is fantastic. I'm sure people have much cooler like sailing or painting, but that's my thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm the same way. I don't do it in the morning though. I'm an afternoon. I work and then I need to get out of the house since I work from home, and that's my reset. And then I can come back and kind of go into home mode versus work mode. So
You know what's interesting about that, Christy, is you are cleanly one or the other. Like my son is exactly like you. He can't get up in the morning for it. And I can't, if I left it to the afternoon, I would not have the energy and I wouldn't show up. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So interesting. So last question for you here. If agencies or marketers are listening, what's the one lesson you want them to take from this conversation?
I guess I'll center it on AI again because it's what everybody's talking about, at the risk of sounding like a broken record. But I think I would say thinking of how to use it, right? I've seen us go from, and again, the craziest thing is that we're not talking about over a course of a few years. We're talking about over the course of a few months. I've seen within my own industry, sort of people not knowing about it to then maybe sticking their heads in the sand about it to then reluctantly using it. And then you're seeing a bifurcation of people who are really embracing it and becoming super users. And I don't mean that in terms of they use it a lot. I don't think the difference is how much you use it. It's how you used it. I was actually meeting with a former colleague for lunch the other day, and I used this analogy. I think it's like an e-bike, right? You'll see when the e-bikes first came out and I tried it, and you pedal as hard as you can and you're getting up to 50 miles an hour and you feel like Superman. That is the coolest thing. And I think that's analogous to AI. But also, I see a bunch of Door Dashers now who sit there and don't pedal and are certainly not in shape and use it and the motor do all the work. That's how you don't use AI. So you can use it as a substitute for your work, or you can use it as a force multiplier to what you're already doing at full bore. And the latter, I think, is the better use of AI.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's a great way to end the show. So Mike, thanks again for the conversation, the insights here. To everybody else that's watching, don't forget to follow CMO Journeys for more conversations with the marketing leaders that are shaping what's next. I'm Christian Badak. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.